Good evening. Good evening. Welcome. I am so impressed. I think you should give yourselves a hand for making it out here in this weather. Thank you so much. This is a very special evening, very special event in my life and for UNCA and the Department of Psychology. And since I'm the only one from the Department of Psychology or the administration who made it here, I am going to give the official welcome on behalf of the University Academic Affairs, the Department of Psychology, my childhood friends, my parents, and the members of the Academy. Oh no, that was a different speech. My name is Ann Weber. I'm a member of the Psychology Department faculty, and thank you. Yes, I'm the shy one. And when I was in high school, I first read about the research of the man who will speak with you tonight, Dr. Phil Zimbardo. He became an idol of mine then. Throughout college, he was an idol of mine. I remember I was in college when the first news broke among researchers of his famous or infamous Stanford prison experiment, which he will describe to you in brief tonight. All through graduate school, I watched for where he was going and what he was doing. I bought every book of his about shyness, which is very funny that he would write a book about shyness and that I would buy a book about shyness, you know. I could say so many things about him. I will keep the credentials short and then tell you a brief anecdote to illustrate for you the kind of wonderful person he is. He grew up in very difficult circumstances, impoverished circumstances, which we'll also describe a little bit to you to give you an idea of his perspective and his interest in these topics. He went to college at New York? Brooklyn College, and taught at NYU, Yale, and Stanford University. And let's see, what else can I tell you about him? He's done astonishing work on de-individuation. I think the thing that most impresses me, most affects me, first of all, are the facts that he is an activist. He acts on what he believes. He was openly opposed to the Vietnam War, openly opposed to the Gulf War, openly opposed to the Iraq War. He will talk to you a lot about what war does to individuals' behavior. He's a philanthropist. He is not just a philanthropist for show, he is a philanthropist for commitment, and he does the difficult things and makes sacrifices and goes out there and begs and acts and meets the people. I think my favorite credentials about Dr. Phil Zimbardo are that he is such an incredible teacher, and that is what captivated me from the beginning. The first times I ever saw images of him speaking, teaching, I thought, I want to do that. That's what I want to do. Okay. And he has won so many awards, I can't list them, which also because I didn't bring the list. And but, you know, you name the level, American Psychological Association, Stanford University, he's won teaching awards at high and low levels. We started working on a book together about 20 years ago, and that was what brought us together and enabled us to become friends, albeit cross-continental friends, because he's living in San Francisco and I'm living here in Nashville, and we communicated via email, and this is in the days before email attachments, and so we had to use email, FedEx, faxing, and great piles of manuscripts brought by strange people to our doorsteps. And we only got a chance to see each other to discuss the book over its 5 editions if we happen to be going to the same conference. And in, I think it was 1993, the American Psychological Association held its conference in Toronto, its annual convention in Toronto, and Phil Zimbardo was going, I was going, and so we had to grab 15 minutes here and there to talk about the book in between times that he had to make speeches and conferences I wanted to go to and so on. And so he cut out of dinner early so that we could talk. We thought we might have about an hour or so to talk about the book and everything. We're wandering around the lobby, and everybody is in the dinner or listening to the dinner speaker. And we're wandering around the lobby, and so let's duck in here and talk. And we ducked through these curtains into this room, and it was the Hall of Desserts. It was where the tables were set up with all the post-dinner desserts. There were cakes, there were pies, there were custards, there were cheesecakes. We started talking about how much dessert meant to us and what our favorite desserts were. There were two people in this room full of desserts and nobody else, and the curtain was closed. Oh my God, where do we start? And then we went over and we got a plate, and he started telling me a story about how when he was young, he just thought the most romantic, wonderful dessert was Charlotte Russe. He wasn't entirely sure what it was, but it looked wonderful, it sounded wonderful, and we talked about that, and we put little things on our plates, and we started to walk over and started to talk about life in the book a little bit, and suddenly we both heard, Are you Dr. Zimbardo? And there were maybe 3 or 4 student-looking people pulling aside the curtain, awestruck. And he turned very graciously. Yes. Why? Can I help you? Oh, I just want to make your acquaintance. And they came over and they started talking. I mean, in no time at all, 7 more would come in, 10 more would come in. And somebody else was standing at the curtain saying. And with incredible eloquence and grace, I stepped off to the side. I stepped behind him. He was just eloquent and gracious and everything, and very subtly, so as not to make it appear that they had interrupted anything, he simply handed his dessert plate untouched back to me, and I whisked it away and went into the corner, and we didn't get to speak for another hour and a half because he dedicated his time to his fans, his students. And he is here for you as much as you are here for him. So, everyone, thank you again. My idol, my mentor, my teacher, my co-author, and my beloved friend, Dr. Phil Zimbardo. Oh, sorry, no housekeeping. Housekeeping. Please turn off your cell phones now. Look at all the heads go. Oh my God. And secondly, please, because we're taping this, please hold questions until after the end of the presentation, and you're welcome to join us in the lobby for the t-shirt sale, the book sale of both of his books, The Time Paradox and The Lucifer Effect, and the book signing.
And take a picture.
And to have pictures taken with the man.
Okay. Great. Thank you. Okay. I'm here tonight in part because Anne invited me, but also the psychology department is using my book, The Core Concepts, so I want to thank the department. This is my first visit here, and it's beautiful. I assume that sometimes you have flowers, and I hear that trees change color, so I'm going to have to come back in the fall or the spring. What I'm going to do tonight is give a very long talk. So I hope people outside are sitting down and not standing up. I think I have 190 slides and 5 or 6 video clips, and it's really 2 talks in one. The first part of my talk it's The Lucifer Effect in Action. That's a book I wrote recently, The Lucifer Effect. And it's really a very personal journey that I've taken from evil to now to heroism. So it's really 2 parts. So part 1, very long part, is I will engulf you in the psychological study of evil. And in part 2, we will lift the dark veil, the secret powers, to talk about my new mission in life is creating ordinary heroes. I should begin by saying that as a teacher, I usually teach large undergraduate classes. So if you teach a large class, it's not enough to be an educator. You have to be an entertainer. And ideally, when it all works together, you also want to inspire people. So my goal is to educate, inform, inspire, and hopefully entertain. And the talk is, if the technology works and we spend a lot of time with the staff, the talk will be a hot talk, and hopefully, come back. So I want to begin with this very basic question. What makes people go wrong? So this is a question about evil, and it's a question that many people have asked for decades. Certainly philosophers, theologians, dramatists, sociologists. The only people who don't ask this question are psychologists. Not that they're not interested in the topic, but we want to ask specific questions for which we have specific ways of answering, namely with experiments or assessment methods. After I got my first and only C in my entire life in introductory psychology, I switched to sociology anthropology at Brooklyn College, and I majored in sociology anthropology. And in my last year, a friend of mine said he needed a partner for experimental psychology. So I did him a favor, and I loved research. And he actually switched to sociology, I switched to psychology. So I have a psychology, anthropology, sociology background, and sociologists ask those kind of questions, the big questions. And so over my lifetime, I began to think, well, why don't we ask big questions and approach it with the kind of specificity, the kind of research methodology that is really the hallmark of psychology. So that's what I want to demonstrate tonight. But I was asking this question long before I was a psychologist. As Ann mentioned, I grew up in the South Bronx. Ghetto has always been, was, hopefully it won't always be. And if you grow up in the inner city, you're surrounded by evil, by drugs, by prostitution, by your good friends doing bad things, kids going to jail, kids getting killed. And I always wondered why kids I knew are good kids, why they went wrong. It's not that why do people go wrong, it's why do people who are good go wrong. So this obsessed me until I became a psychologist. I said, what I'm going to do is create conditions in the experiment, in the laboratory, in the field. I'm going to put good people in situations that I think are going to push them to do evil things and observe who does the bad thing, who doesn't. And so instead of saying why do people go wrong, I want to know why do good people turn evil. So it raises the ante. We're going to start at time one. Everybody agrees, no, this is a good guy, this is a good girl. And at time two, they say, oh my God, what got into them? What are they doing? The reason we're curious, the reason we ask that question is not idle curiosity. Psychologists are really optimistic. We think if we understand a process, if we understand the mechanisms, we can begin to develop interventions, to minimize it, prevent it in various ways. And so once we know enough about the causes of, in quote, evil, we'll describe that in a minute, then maybe we could develop remedies. As a kid, I was also influenced by Robert Louis Stevenson's famous fiction about Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. If you remember that story, Dr. Jekyll, a good guy, invents some chemical that when he takes it, he is transformed. He crosses the line between good and evil, becomes the evil Mr. Hyde, killer, rapist. And when the drug wears off, he goes back across the line and becomes a good Dr. Jekyll. He can't resist one more trial, and also there was no human subjects committee, so he could be his own subject, he could do it all he wanted. And again, he's transformed. Well, for me, I was interested, my friends, of course, were interested in what was in the juice, because they would love to try it. I was interested in the line, because I had been told by my parents and others that the line between good and evil was impermeable. We good people were here, the bad people were there, and it protected us. It was kind of like almost like a protection blanket. But the novel made me entertain the possibility that good people could be seduced across that line. Well, in this case with a chemical, but maybe there are other ways, and maybe even bad people could be rehabilitated. So those two things, growing up with evil surrounding me, and growing up with that kind of story, pushed me in this direction that I'm going to talk to you about tonight. But I do want to start with this wonderful illusion by the Dutch artist M.C. Escher. It's Angels and Devils. I want you to focus on the white as the figure and make the black the background. It's easy if you squint a little bit. And if you do, you see here's angels and tutus, a world full of angels and goodness all around. Now, if you take a moment to look more deeply and focus on the black as the figure and the white as the background, now you see a world full of demons, the horns, the wings, all over. And that tells us what? That the world is, was, and will always be filled with good and evil, because good and evil are part of the human condition. It's our yin and yang. My argument is, it's not like we're born good and we get corrupted by the situation, we're born evil and we have to be socialized into goodness. Because we have this incredible brain, this marvelous mind, it gives us the potential to do anything that is imaginable. Anything any human being has ever done becomes possible for any of us. And anything we can imagine, even if it's never been done, like skyjacking or like making an airplane into a missile and flying it into World Trade Center. So the good and evil are part of our nature. And the big argument I'm going to make, whether or not we go in this direction or that direction often depends on the circumstances that we encounter on our life path. So the Lucifer effect is really an ancient story made up by some guys, probably priests and rabbis and teachers, that one day when God creates what he calls his perfect creature Adam, he says, I want all the angels to honor my Adam. Lucifer, who was God's favorite angel, Lucifer means the light. In some scriptures, he's called the morning star. He's number one among the angels. And he and a number of other angels, Beelzebub and Mammon, said, God, it doesn't make sense. We're angels. He's a mere mortal. And God said, you have just committed two sins. The sin of pride, and pride goeth before the fall, and the sin of disobedience to ultimate authority. And therefore, he calls in Michael, the hitman, mafia hitman, always with the big sword. There's a big battle, and of course, with God on his side, Michael's forces have to win. And at that moment, this is on the cathedral in Vienna, with a little help from God, God paradoxically creates hell as a metaphorical and physical place to embody evil, and Lucifer, God's favorite angel, becomes the devil, Satan, cast out of hell with the other fallen angels, cast out of heaven into hell. So this is the arc of the most extreme transformation imaginable. God's favorite angel becomes the devil. I mean, that's the extremes. That's the bookend of human imagination. And so if that is possible even in myth, then all I want to study is how good people do bad things, not angels becoming devils. So that set the context for my saying, let me look at how good people can get corrupted to do bad things. I should say in passing that in writing the book, I've developed an affinity for Lucifer, because Lucifer actually was right and God was wrong. Meaning, what Lucifer did is what? Came back and corrupted Adam. How could Adam be God's perfect creature if he's so easily corruptible? And then you realize the story of Adam and Eve and the story of Lucifer is the same story. It's what are the horrific consequences of disobeying authority. If you're God's favorite angel, you turn into the devil and get kicked out of heaven. And if you're God's favorite creation, Adam, and you take a bite of an apple, in a forest of apples, but God said, don't eat the fruit of the tree of knowledge, you get cast out of paradise. So these are stories that guys made up. For what? To promote the idea of total obedience to authority. Okay? And so these are now deep myths. There could have been no one person who knew that. It's not like, the gospel according to St. Paul, St. John, etc. They overheard crap. These are stories guys made up to get across that message that you must obey authority. And we'll see in a moment the danger of obeying unjust authority. So this is an incredible book that I would recommend to you. It's called A Malleus Maleficarum, which is Latin for the witch's hammer. In the Middle Ages, two German theologians said, something doesn't make sense to us. Evil exists in a world created by God. God's all-powerful, all-knowing, all-loving. Why doesn't God say, no more evil? And they reason in a very long, torturous way that God allows evil to exist. In fact, it's almost as if God has a pact with the devil to put temptation before us. And when we give in to temptation, we go to hell. When we resist temptation, we go to heaven. And so essentially, what they're arguing is, but after the devil seduced Adam, God said the devil can no longer work his evil on people directly. Well, the devil is shrewd. He now, in quotes, gets people he sleeps with the devil, and they become witches. And so witches then corrupt us. So they reason, how do you get rid of evil? If the devil corrupts witches and witches corrupt people, all you have to do is get rid of the middle person. By getting rid of the witches, you stop evil. Literally, that was their thinking. And so the witch hunts that started in the Inquisition in the Middle Ages swept through 22 nations, and as you know, in America it went to Salem, Massachusetts. And essentially it was, you get them to confess, you burn them at the stake, you boil them in oil, and essentially they created torture techniques and torture tactics to break the human spirit. it also started the legacy of violence against women. Because as you see, and if you say which, you think women. Because women were vulnerable. It not only was a religious thing, the church and the state combined, and that's why it spread so much, because you kept the property of the person that was a witch. You confiscated their property. So again, women, especially women who were widowed, all somebody had to say, she's a witch. You went on trial, you always lost the trial. And so it was economic as well as religious. So there were many definitions of evil. Mine is a simple one, a psychological one. It has to do primarily with power. It's the exercise of power to harm people psychologically through rumors, through prejudice, through discrimination, through bullying, to hurt people physically through torture, through abuse, through rape, to destroy, mortally to kill. And when evil is done by systems and governments, and that's where the real evil is, it's to commit crimes against humanity. A simple definition that one of my teachers, Irv Sarnoff, developed is evil is knowing better and doing worse. Now, my whole talk is going to be about what I'm going to call situational evil. What are the features of situations that can undercut conscience and morality? But we have to say, there are people whose whole life is organized around evil themes. That is, they can account for the deaths of millions of people. People in my generation point to Adolf Hitler and Joseph Stalin. New research shows that Chairman Mao, in his Great Leap Forward and Cultural Revolution, accounted for even more deaths of Chinese citizens than either Hitler or Stalin of the people they conquered. But is there a more modern example that some of you know about of evil, of an evil person? I think so. I mean, without being political, there's a wonderful takeoff. It says, Bush administration declares war on Canada, France, and Germany because they didn't want to go to war with us. Again, the war on lies that we are still in after all of these years, billions of dollars. I don't know what the last count is. It's moving up to 5,000 soldiers dead, maybe 50,000, permanently seriously injured, and it was all on a lie. And people have forgotten that. There was zero reason to go to war in Iraq. In fact, the even worse thing is we were 1 month away from winning the war in Afghanistan, 1 month away by all military accounts. Taliban was virtually destroyed. And instead of winning that war, we took all of those forces and sent them to Iraq, and now we're going to be in Afghanistan for years with more deaths, more destruction. Here's the reason I say he's evil. Listen to this speech.
We have to work toward the dark side, if you will. We're going to spend time in the shadows and in the intelligence world. A lot of what needs to be done here will have to be done quietly, without any discussion, using sources and methods that are available to our intelligence agencies.
If you notice the date, that was 5 days after September 11th. They didn't have a clue who the people were. They were mostly Saudis. There was no Iraqis there in that group. So he's already setting up a secret police. There was a secret police separate from the CIA, separate from the FBI, under only his command. Well, for the younger generation, obviously, Darth Vader is the symbol of evil. And I met him recently, and he's very powerful. I worked very hard not to fall under his spell, and I think I've almost succeeded. But now the problem with dispositional evil is you point to people. So here's Hitler, here's Stalin. But you look at this list of misery in our century. In Pakistan, not 3 million died. In Cambodia, 1.6. In Rwanda, in 3 months, 1 million Tutsis are killed by Hutu. The names drop out because the evil is in the system. It doesn't matter. There's not an evil person like Hitler or Stalin or Chairman Mao. It's part of a system of domination, a system of control, a system of revenge. And so for me, yes, there are evil people, but it's better to think about evil systems because it's hard to change them, but at least that's where the power is. I'm sure all of you saw the horrific images of American soldiers, men and women, abusing Iraqi prisoners. There were a dozen pictures that were leaked shown all over the world. It was probably the biggest stain on America's morality of anything that's happened in I guess, ever. I was shocked as you were, but I wasn't surprised, because I saw those same pictures from the guards abusing the prisoners in the Stanford prison experiment, stripping them naked, bags over their head, sexually abusing in various ways. The Bush administration, and of course the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, went on television immediately and said, this is the work of a few rogue soldiers, a few bad apples. Whenever there's a scandal in the police department, in the military, in the fire department, in any department, the administration always says, don't blame us, blame the few bad apples. Well, my hypothesis was, I knew in my experiment on day one, I worked very hard to have only good apples, and I put them in a bad barrel, and the barrel won, and the people lost. So I said, I went on National Public Radio and interviewed, I said, my hypothesis, the American soldiers are good. It was the barrel they were forced to operate in that was bad, and that's what corrupted them. And in fact, I defended one of the guards, Chip Frederick, who was the sergeant in charge, because his lawyer called me and said, hey, you know, I can help you get the data to answer your hypothesis. You get to know him, you get to know the other soldiers, you can talk to the senior interrogating force, you can get access to all of the investigations by, there were 12 of them, by generals and by the head of, former head of Secretary James Schlesing, the former Secretary of Defense, and you could see all of the 1,000 images. They're not a dozen, they're 1,000. So I couldn't resist. I said, okay, and then so I got to know him, and I defended him in his trial. So what I want to do is begin by saying evil is this vague concept. I want to focus now as if we were in a case study, in a surgery lab, in a mental hospital, to say, here's what we're putting on trial, here's a case study. And so here's a set of those pictures. A few you've seen, many of you haven't seen, because both presidential administrations say we don't want the public to see these. And the reason is they are horrific, they are horrendous. I call it digitally documented depravity. All of these are from the cameras of soldiers on the night shift. The abuses happen in only one place, something called Tier 1A, we'll say why, and only on the night shift, why not on the day shift? And we want to know who were those soldiers, who did these things. We do want to know that all of the soldiers, every soldier on the night shift did some of these things. They only vary in how much they did. And these are military police guards. And some of the images are violent and sexual in nature. So, and what I've done is I've added movement and sound to increase the emotional impact. So let's open the doors and go down the dungeon and see evil in action. So it begins with push-ups. You want to remember his face. This is a guard on duty. So I end with the juxtaposition of Leonardo da Vinci's humanity with a picture of a prisoner who was mentally ill, who covered himself with his shit every day, and the guards had to roll him in dirt so he wouldn't stink. They all called him Shit Boy. When Chip Frederick, who's in charge, complained that there were mentally ill prisoners like him, they said, it's war. We don't have any, there's no facility. When he complained that some prisoners had tuberculosis, spreading contagious disease, they said, sorry, it's war. We don't have any facility. They said, they're boys, 50 boys, mixed with 1,000 men. That's a recipe for disaster. As you know, they said, sorry, we don't have any facilities, just make do. And so here's Rumsfeld, and here's General Karpinski, who should have been in charge, but neither she nor any officer in 3 months, those abuses took place over 3 months, night after night for 3 months, she nor no officer ever went down to the dungeon at night. That's an interesting thing. And so they asked the question, who are the bad apples? Bad question. Psychologists know that who sets the frame becomes the con artist, regardless of what the artist that makes the picture. Setting the frame in a debate means you're going to win. So if you ask the who question, it can only be people. If you say what is responsible, it could be people, but it could be something about the situation. So let's say, what is responsible? Well, who were the prison guards? They weren't real soldiers. Nobody told you that. They were Army reservists with zero training for mission-specific combat. Okay? Army reservists in a time of war are the lowest form of animal life in the military, have no respect of any other soldiers. A lot of what they did was to get bragging rights. They showed they were proud of what they were doing. They showed those pictures. They gave the discs to other soldiers to put them on this screensaver. The guys piled naked in a pyramid was a very popular screensaver. Tier 1A was the interrogation center. It was run by military intelligence. The CIA also had interrogators there, and there was a third group of interrogators from a civilian group called the Titan Corporation. So it had 3 sets of interrogators, translators, analysts, etc. And they didn't have any work to do until after George Bush announced mission accomplished. We won the war. If you remember, the next day the insurgency breaks out. Our soldiers are being killed all over. And they start arresting all the men around any explosion. And so when Chip Frederick gets there in September, there's 200 prisoners. In a month, there's 1,000. Okay? So now he's in charge of 9 guys dealing with 1,000 prisoners, 60 Iraqi policemen are smuggling weapons and drugs in, helping prisoners escape, and the 9 other people on his shift. Not a single officer ever went down to the night shift. So there's no surveillance, there's no oversight. And finally, they're interrogating these guys, they're getting nothing. And the pressure comes down from the military command, from the Bush command. You must get actionable intelligence to help us stop this insurgency. So the military intelligence goes to military police and says, you have to take off the gloves, you have to break the prisoners, you have to prepare them for interrogation. Do whatever you have to do so when we interrogate them, they're going to talk. And then there's no constraint, there's no oversight. And after a while, there's no officer coming down. When I saw the guy with the face paint, that's all I had to see, that one picture. If you're on duty and you're dressed like that, you are out of uniform. You could be busted. That's the face paint of a Detroit rock group called Insane Clown Posse. And that group, I'm not sure it's still functioning, promoted misogyny and violence. So how were Rumsfeld and Cheney involved? With Cheney by setting up secret police, by setting up secret renditions. Cheney's doing that. So here's this guy, and here's Rumsfeld. Rumsfeld issued a set of techniques acceptable for interrogators at Guantanamo Bay. And they included stress position, standing on a box for up to 4 hours, bent over, have a hood placed over your head, light and auditory, either sensory deprivation or sensory overload, removal of religious items, shaving, forced shaving of hair, nakedness. They said nakedness as a dehumanization tactic. They use those words. So the reason so many guys were naked, it was to humiliate them, to embarrass them, especially in front of female officers. And the use of detainee individual phobias. They would try to find out what are prisoners afraid of. It's right out of Orwell's 1984, and essentially using the dogs. Now initially the dogs had to be muzzled. If you're a dog handler, who's afraid of a muzzled dog? So as you saw in the pictures, they took the muzzles off, obviously very, very quickly. What happened is the head, General Miller, who's the head of Guantanamo Bay, they send him to Abu Ghraib to say, we're going to Gitmoize your prison. Gitmo was the short for Guantanamo Bay. And he literally brings this menu and says to the general in Abu Ghraib, here's what you have to do. You have to get information using these techniques. So that's why Rumsfeld and Cheney are involved here. One of the worst of the guards on the night shift was Corporal Grainer. He's the one in many of these pictures that you saw. And what I have in my book, in an appendix, was a commendation he received in November, in the middle of these abuses. And it says here, Corporal Grainer, you're doing a fine job on Tier 1A in the prison. You have received many accolades from military intelligence units here, and specifically from Lieutenant Colonel, there was only one, Jordan. Continue to perform at this level, and it will help our overall mission. He's getting accolades for doing the things you saw, and the date is November 16, 2003, in the middle of all of this abuse. So he doesn't think he's doing anything wrong. In fact, they say the problem is, you're out of uniform very often, you should wear your uniform. So they're saying we're doing good deeds. And in fact, when I said, notice the picture of the guy with the black eye and a piece of tape over, they pick him up, the Navy SEALs pick him up outside of some explosion. They think he's selling explosives. They beat the shit out of him. They break his ribs, and they bring him down to Abu Ghraib to be interrogated. They get down to Abu Ghraib, and there's a CIA operative, I think Charles Swainer. He's there, and he tells two of these guards, bring him to the shower room and hang him on a hook. Hang him on a hook. And the guards hear yelling and screaming, and then Swainer runs out and says, my God, he's dead. They take him down, and they don't know what to do with him now. And so they have this plan. They're going to wrap him in sheets and ice, pretend he has pneumonia, pretend they're going to take him to the hospital, so when other prisoners see them taking out, essentially they pay a cab driver to take him in the woods and dump him. But because our soldiers are taking pictures of everything, they take pictures of themselves. So you see Grainer and Harmon giving the high five to him when he's dead. And so they document the fact that this guy was there. He's what they call a ghost detainee. That is, many of the prisoners, they didn't have a record of them. They had some number so that if they got rid of them, there would be no record of them. But the soldiers are saying, they are killing people. Nothing we did. I mean, it was mostly humiliation, degradation, all those pictures. We didn't kill anybody. Not only are they killing it, they're getting away with it. Swainer lives in Texas. Again, he's not been charged. And I'll say in the future, not a single officer got a reprimand. Command complicity means if your subordinates engage in immoral, illegal behavior that you should have known about, you are culpable. It went on for 3 months. Who was watching the store? I mean, we're paying their salary. Go down to the dungeon, see what's happening. They didn't go down to check because, in fact, they wanted the soldiers to do whatever they could do to soften the prisoners up. They just never thought there would be the photos. So how do psychologists go about understanding such transformations of human character? The guy I defended, there's no question about it, he is as good an American citizen, patriotic soldier as anybody I've ever met. And he goes down to that dungeon and he becomes one of the monsters. The basic way we try to understand this is called dispositional, bad apples. We look inside for genetic predispositions, for personality traits, for character, and we try to understand the outcome. All of psychiatry begins and ends there. Mostly clinical psychology is about that. Cognitive psychology is about that. Assessment psychology. Social psychologists like me come along and say, of course people are important, but people are always in a situation, in a behavioral context. So we have to understand the power of the situation on individuals. What is it that situations do to people? And that's the bad barrel. But it wasn't until I got deeply involved in Abu Ghraib, talking to various criminal investigators and soldiers and so forth, that I realized by talking, is it the person or situation? We miss the big picture. The big picture is what? It's the system, stupid. The system creates, maintains, justifies those situations. The system is where the power is. It's legal, it's economic, it's cultural, it's historical. And so all of our attempts to change behavior essentially begin and end here. Education, therapy, rehabilitation is just that. But if it's the situation, then as fast as you cure people here, the situation is dumping them out more and more and more. So for example, as this little aside, Anne mentioned the work I did in shyness. After we understood about shyness, I set up the first shyness clinic in America. It's been running in the community for 30 years. It's very effective. We help almost everybody minimize shyness, overcome it, prevent it. As fast as we can cure somebody, the system is turning out 100 more. Shyness is at an epidemic level in America. More than half of all the people we surveyed say, I think of myself as a shy person. Partly the responsibility goes to the new electronic technologies, which give people an illusion of connectedness, but in fact physically isolate people. So you have a whole generation of kids who don't know how to relate one-on-one. All they know how to do is Facebook and Twitter and be LinkedIn, but not psychologically, not socially LinkedIn. So that's one of the reasons shyness is increasing. So unless you're aware of what the system does, you could be diddling around with your therapy, with your rehabilitation, with your new educational systems, and you're destined to fail. So the Lucifer effect is really understanding human behavior at those three levels. We have to understand, what do people bring into any situation? People are important. They're the actors on the stage. We have to understand the situation. You know, what are the props? What are the other actors? What are the costumes? What's the audience like? That's the situation, because that's going to change the individual behavior. And then we have to say, what is the dominant system that produces, maintains, justifies those situations? So the Lucifer Effect, which I'll be signing outside, actually won, was a New York Times bestseller and won award, the William James Award for the best book in psychology last year, for which I'm very proud. We have a great website, lucifereffect.com. Please go to it. There's all kinds of stuff. It's about the book. It's about me. There's going to be a movie made, probably starting this summer. The director and screenwriter is a guy named Christopher McQuarrie. He won the Oscar for Usual Suspects, and they're now just casting actors. And I was hoping for Sean Penn, but I'm not sure. Actually, John Cusack might play. I met him, and he might be ideal. But the Lucifer Effect, even though the first 15 chapters of the book are grim, it's about the Stanford prison study, day by day, hour by hour, because I have to convince you, how could, as I'll show you in a minute, how could normal, healthy kids have emotional breakdowns when the guards are just using words? I prevented the guards from physically abusing the prisoners. It didn't make a difference. They broke them psychologically. And then I have 2 chapters on all the research in social psychology, some of which I'm going to present in a minute, which supports the notion that situations have greater power over us than we'd like to believe. And then we go to Abu Ghraib. Let's look at the people involved, let's look at the situation, then let's look at the system. And after 15 chapters, then I turn to say, oh my God, you know, is there any hope for the rest of us? And then half the chapter is on how can we resist these pressures, which are enormous. And then the last chapter is how do we celebrate heroism? Who are the people who resist? And that's how I'm going to give my talk today. So the same mind that makes some of us kind makes others cruel. The same mind that makes some caring makes others indifferent. Same mind that makes some creative makes others destructive. And it pushes some people to be villains, and the good news pushes some of us to be heroes. A great New Yorker cartoon, which is the whole talk I'm going to give. I'm neither a good cop nor a bad cop, Jerome. Like yourself, I'm a complex amalgam of positive and negative personality traits that emerge or not depending on circumstances. At the end of my talk, I'm going to present the summary of one of the investigative reports at Abu Ghraib by James Schlesinger, along with a number of generals, and he says almost the same exact thing. But if you go to English majors, if you go to Major Barber George Bernard Shaw, who's one of my favorite authors, he says the following: every reasonable man and woman is a potential scoundrel and a potential good citizen. What a man does depends on his character. What a man is depends on his character. What he does and what we think of what he does depends upon circumstances. So he makes the distinction between the dispositional, what you are is inside of you, what you do, and how we evaluate what you do depends on those circumstances. Now, are there any circumstances that can make good Samaritans turn into bad guys and gals? Okay. We're going to go to Princeton Theological Seminary, not too far from here. People go to seminary because they're good to begin with and they want to be better. They want to save the world. And so 2 social psychologists are going to play on the theme of the Good Samaritan. It's the most popular sermon in the whole Bible. And it's, on the road from Jericho to Jerusalem, there's a person lying on the road that everybody passes by, except the Good Samaritan who stops, helps him, brings him to an inn, gives the innkeeper money, comes back and checks on him. And that becomes a model of what we all should be. We all should be the Good Samaritan. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. That's really the golden rule. But does it make a difference if you're in a hurry? Being in a hurry is a situational variable. So John Darley and Dan Batson did the following simple study. They got theology students, they say, we're studying the power of sermons. We'd like you to give the Good Samaritan sermon. You know it? Of course you know it. Okay, so go across the alley. On the other side is the communication department. Tell them you're in the experiment. They'll expect you to have your name. And you're going to make a videotape. We're going to play it to people. So we want you to make a very powerful sermon, as you would if you're, when you get to be a minister up on the altar, on the stage. The only thing they varied is for some of them, they said, oh my God, you're late. Please hurry. The others say, you're on time, don't delay. So everything is the same. Now, in your mind, you're going to give the Good Samaritan talk. You're going to go across the alley. But on the way, there's a victim in distress. Obviously Confederate. He's a guy in a corner moaning. And the question is, who stops? Some people stop and look and pass by. Some people stop and help. You Good Samaritans, you're on your way to give the Good Samaritan lecture. Here's a chance to be a Good Samaritan. Who stops? The results are extraordinary. If you're on time, 90% stop. If you are late, 90% pass them by. End of the continuum. How could that be? And of course, when they get there, after they do your sermon, they say, did you notice anything on the way? Someone said, no. They said, well, there's some guy sleeping. So you change the situation, you justify it. Oh, I was going to go, he may have been, I was going to go back when I finish this. You had all these mechanisms for reducing the dissonance between passing by somebody who needs you and your mission to talk about what a Good Samaritan is. So here's a social situational variable, whether you perceive you're late or not. And in fact, lots of studies of bystander intervention in subways, people who are in a hurry pass people by. And I'm going to present a wonderful example of this in the reverse. That if you're in a hurry, you don't notice things you ought to notice because they could make you a better person. No time to help a stranger in distress when I'm in a hurry. Here's a wonderful demonstration of situational power. You're going to see 5 objects, all doing their own thing, all individual, different, going each way. And then suddenly we're going to change a little piece of the situation, and then they're all going to be homogenized. They're all going to be blindly obedient. Watch this. So 5 metronomes, each doing their own thing. And you're just going to put them on 2 Coca-Cola cans. And now the vibrations of each are going to affect the vibrations of the one next to it. Pretty astounding. And the same thing happens with people in various ways. Many of you know Joshua Bell, one of the great violinists, the violinist in the red violin for which he made $1 million, romantic violinist, handsome guy. His violin cost $3 million at Stradivarius. He played in Kennedy Center. People paid $100 or more for a ticket. And they did an interesting experiment to say context matters. Joshua Bell is now going to be out of context. Same violin, same guy, only he's going to have a baseball cap on. And he's going to play in a subway station in Washington, D.C. shortly after he gave this concert that people couldn't get in. He's going to play. He's going to play the same music he played in Kennedy Center, 45 minutes, and they're going to see who stops to listen. They're going to videotape the whole thing. And he also puts his hat out, another hat, see how much money he makes, okay? So context matters. Does it matter where you hear a great concert violinist play his music? 3 years ago in Washington, D.C. Metro Station, he plays for free for panhandling charges. 1,097 passengers are recorded passing by, and he plays 6 classical pieces for 43 minutes. No tucks, but dressed reasonably well. How many stopped? How much did he earn? 7 people out of 1,097 stopped. The average stopping time was 1 minute, and he made $32, okay? And he was happy somebody gave $1. People throwing 10 cents, pennies, and so forth. And no one stopped for more than a minute. I mean, if you stop for a minute, so everybody's in a hurry, it's like the Good Samaritan, but here's this world-class violinist, so you miss your subway, I mean, your train, for another 5 minutes. So again, here's context matter. Same person, same violin, same music was not enough to get people to stop. So again, here. So he, as I said, he earned $32. America has an obesity epidemic. We've had it for a while, and now it's a call to arms. Mrs. Obama is having a campaign and so forth. We're destined to lose that. The same way we lost the war on poverty, the war on drugs, we're going to lose the war on obesity, because what is the system that's promoting obesity? It's all the fast food companies that are making billions of dollars, okay? You can say we're going to have good food in schools and so forth and so forth. The kids come out of school and there's McDonald's and there's Taco Bell and all these other places. But if we think of obesity as dispositional, it's in the genes, it's excess calories, it's not exercising. So what's the change strategy? Diet books, diet centers, surgery, counseling. Nothing works over time. Everything works for the first year, and then you drift back. What are ignored are cultural and social factors and media bombardment promoting desirability of fast foods. The other thing that's ignored is a social norm in America of making obesity acceptable. Not in general, but in family and among friends. What does that mean? Instead of saying, if you're obese, you're going to die. You're going to die soon and you're going to die an unpleasant death. Social connections are a prime cause of obesity. What does that mean? 2 researchers, one at Harvard, one at, I think, Irvine, a physician and a political scientist, have done research that concludes network phenomena appear to be relevant to the biologic and behavioral trait of obesity. Obesity appears to spread through social ties. The spread of obesity in social network appears to be a factor in the obesity epidemic. So what they do is, there's a database in Harvard, I think it's called a Framingham study. For 32 years, they have collected data on several thousand people, not only body mass index, but social index. Who's your family, who's your friends, who's your close friends, who's more remote friends, how often do you see them, et cetera, et cetera. So they're able to now match, and they do this every year. They could see when people become obese, when you become obese, also we now have your family, your sister, your father, your brother, all of those connections. Does becoming obese influence or spread to other people? And the data is, this is 12,000 people over 32 years. Your chance of becoming obese if your brother is obese is 41%. Your chance of becoming obese is 67% if your sister is. It doesn't work between brother and sister. If a cross-gender has no impact. If your spouse is obese, 44%. Among your best friend, if your mutual friend is obese, chances are you're going to become obese is 170%. In fact, you go 2 steps further. If you look at people who are not your best friend, but like second and third, it spreads through three successive social ties. And it doesn't matter if they're physically present. It's not modeling. It's not you look at somebody and say, oh, they argue it's a social norm. And the researchers are Nicholas Christakis and I forget his name, Fowler, and they have a wonderful book called Connected. They conclude the observation that people are embedded in social networks suggests that both good and bad behaviors might spread through a range of social ties. This highlights the necessity of approaching obesity not only as a clinical problem, but also as a public health problem. Okay, that is, how do you change? It's all about changing attitude, changing social norms. And in their book, they show this is the same exact thing with smoking, and they also want to show it's the same thing with positive things, of people being empathic or altruistic. Yeah, the book is connected. So it's James Fowler and Nicholas Christakis, The Surprising Power of Social Networks and How They Shape Our Lives. Stanley Milgram is somebody whose name many of you have heard if you've taken a psychology course. He and I were classmates in senior high school in James Monroe in the Bronx. And he was a little Jewish kid, but very worrisome. He worried that the Holocaust might happen again in America, and being a Jew, he'd be put in a concentration camp. People said, don't be stupid, Stanley. It's America. That was Nazi Germany. It can't happen here. He said, how do you know? Do you think there's nobody who'd be willing to be a guard in a concentration camp in New Haven, Connecticut, where he was a new professor? And he said, would you electrocute a stranger if Hitler asked you? And they said, don't be stupid. He said, how do you know? We all like to think well of ourselves. How do you know unless we put you in that situation? Well, Hitler's dead. But why don't we create a situation when arbitrary authority tells you to shock an innocent person more and more, almost to death? Would you do it? No way. He said, let's see. But his study is considered the most unethical done in psychology, of course, until I did mine. But listen to what he says, why he did this, if you will, unethical research. Unethical in the sense that people suffered.
When I learn of incidents such as the massacre of millions of men, women, and children perpetrated by the Nazis in World War II, how is it possible, I ask myself, that ordinary people who are courteous and decent in everyday life can act callously, inhumanely, without any limitations of conscience? Now, there are some studies in my discipline, social psychology, that seem to provide a clue to this question. The problem I wanted to study was a little different. It went a little bit further. It was the issue of authority. Under what conditions would a person obey authority who commanded actions that went against conscience?
So his research tested 1,000 ordinary citizens, no students, no high school students, no college students, men aged 20 to 50, and in one group he also ran women, which I'll describe in a minute. So in a way, it's the most representative study in all of social sciences. This is the ad that appeared in New Haven Register. $4 an hour, persons need a study of memory. We want 500 New Haven men to complete a scientific study at Yale. And he says, we want laborers, barbers, clerks, white-collar people, blue-collar, ordinary people, okay? And so you read that and say, yeah, I'll go down. And you go down, and it's you and some other guy. It's two guys. And this guy is a middle-aged guy, looks like, very pleasant, somebody's uncle. He mentions that he's got a little heart condition, and the experimenter says it won't be a problem. The experimenter is in the lab coat. The teacher, the one who's going to teach the learner what to do, and when the learner gets it right, he's going to reward him by saying good, and when he gets it wrong, he's going to punish him. So it's a study about the effects of judicious use of punishment on improving memory. So all evil begins with an ideology of goodness. That is, we want to protect national security. Here we want to help people improve their memory. How are you going to do it? By hurting them. But we don't say hurting, we say delivering electrical stimulation. And what happens is the experimenter says, when he makes a mistake, you press the first of these 30 switches. It's only 15 volts. And then when he makes another mistake, you press the second one. It's only 15 volts higher. And the third one's 15 volts higher. So evil begins with 15 volts, always. Keep that in mind. All evil is that small first step. And it changes by increments that are barely noticeable. So when you're at 100, it's only slightly different than 85. We're at 115, it's only slightly different from 100. But now, and of course he has, so along this continuum is not only the buttons, but they're labels. Shock, high shock, intense shock, danger, high voltage, danger, severe shock. Now it's 375 volts. The guy has been screaming, I got a heart condition, I don't want to do this. And almost every subject that's recorded says, sir, what will happen if something goes wrong? Who'll be responsible? I will, of course. I'm the experimenter. You must go on, teacher. And throughout, people are dissenting. I say, I'm not that kind of person. The experimenter says, I know you're not. Just keep shocking. If you dissent, it makes you feel good. It doesn't help the guy in the other room. Unless you disobey and refuse to go on, your dissent is irrelevant. But now it gets up to 375 volts. The guy screams, and there's a thud. Bam! and silence. And you say, are you okay inside? So you're in a room with the experiment, and the learner is in another room, and there's no answer. He says, sir, he's not answering. The experiment says, you don't understand. Failure to respond is an error of omission, which is the same as an error of commission. You got to continue to shock him. Okay, critical thinking exercise. I'm supposed to be improving his memory. He's dead or he's unconscious. At that point, you quit the experiment, right? I mean, you're adult, you're grown up. How many people quit at that point? Experiment says you must go on. And then, so when it gets up to these last two things, 450 volts, and what is it, 15 below, XXX, pornography of power. Who would go all the way to the end? Milgram asked 40 psychiatrists, describe the experiment, maybe with not as much drama as me, and they said only 1% of Americans, because that's sadistic behavior, and only sadists would do that, and we know from statistical analysis only 1% of Americans are sadistic. They are guilty of what social psychologists call the fundamental attribution error. They put total emphasis on the person and they ignore the situation. So they ignore the experiment in the lab coat, they ignore the role playing, they ignore the gradual increasing severity of the shock. And they say 1%. So that's our base rate. They say 1%. What's the data? Here's the number of people who give the shock, and this is the amount of shock. Nobody stops until 285 volts. The guy's been screaming his ass off. Now, at this point, 5 people quit. 315, 375, the guy screams, thud, 1 person quits. How could it be? You know, it doesn't make sense. In fact, it's not 1%, it's 65%. 2/3 of all the subjects went all the way to the end. Okay. Now, I said he tested 1,000 subjects. In any one study, it's only 50 or 60. Let's look at the other 16 studies. In each study, he varies one aspect of the social situation. We call that experimental variations. So in study 16, the percentage of people going to 450 volts is 91%. 9 out of 10 people go all the way. Why? In study 16, you come in and they say, we're running a little late. Why don't you sit and wait till the other person finishes? And you see a Confederate looking like you go all the way to the end. In study number 5, only 10% go all the way. In study 5, you come in and you see people like you rebel. That says we are powerful social models for other people. If you model evil behavior, it's going to spread to others. If you model good behavior, caring behavior, compassionate behavior, it's going to spread in a positive way. What about women? Study 13, no different than men, 60%. So this says, in this situation, it's not putting good or bad people in, it's varying little pieces of the situation. If the victim is not in another room but next to you, you give less shock. If the experiment is in the other room, not next to you, you give less shock. In condition 1, only 1% of people shock. If the learner says, I'd like to be shocked, I don't mind being shocked, shock me, people say, that's sick. I mean, and nobody does it. Okay. But now, in that study, in fact, the guy being shocked was a Confederate. At the end of the study, he comes out, he tells the guy, look, I was a Confederate, here's the reason we're doing the study. You really didn't shock me, you didn't hurt me, you just thought I did. And almost everybody did, they believed it. Well, some psychologists said, well, maybe they said it. Maybe a lot of them didn't believe they were doing it, that's why they went all along. Let's set up a study where instead of some random person, this is the object you're going to shock, this little puppy, this cute little puppy. Would you teach a new dog old tricks in order to survive? So now what happens is, can you imagine any situation that I could put you in which you would shock this dog repeatedly more and more over 10 trials? No way. I mean, you say, I love that puppy, it's a cute puppy, I'm not that kind of person. But now the guy in the lab coat is your psychology professor in a course in learning and conditioning, and your grade depends on teaching that dog a new trick. What do you mean? What it means is the dog is put in this, they call it a shuttle box, and the floor is an electrified grid. And when a light goes on, the puppy has to learn to turn and go to this part of the box, which is safe. When he does consistently, he avoids getting shocked. Light goes on, he runs out. If he doesn't do it, he continues to get shocked for some period of time, let's say a minute. And you have a box with 10 buttons. When you press the first button, you're electrifying the grid. And in fact, you really are. You press the button, you know the shock is in the grid because the dog is jumping up and down and squealing and twisting around. There's no question about it. When you think you are increasing it, you're really not. It's always the same level. But you're going from 1 to 2. You think you're getting worse and worse and worse. But the puppy's paws are sensitive, and it's going to jump and squeal on, and you think you're doing it. In every case, so this is 20 men, 20 women in this class, and the girls are all in tears. I'm going to take you home. I'm going to report the teacher to the dean. It's really terrible. So the question is, who would do this? So we look at the guys, and half the guys, almost like no, half of them go all the way. They go up to the 10th level. What about the girls? Caring, compassionate, loving, mothering, I love you, puppy. How could that be? Wait, I'll go back. Whoops, okay. I'm sorry. Mo was startled by it, even though I know. So this study was done back in 1971. They actually presented at a convention in the American Psychological Association. They got booed off the stage, so it's never been published. It's only in the proceedings of the American Psychological Association. And actually, Anne helped me get in touch with the authors to loan me the pictures. Why is women 100%? Are they more evil? Are they more uncaring? No, simple. It's 1971. Female students were more likely to be dominated by a male instructor, and grades then and now are more important for women than men, okay? And so it's those things, has nothing to do with being good and evil. It's those situational circumstances. You could never do the study again, but if you did anything like it, I think you would not, hopefully you would not get the same thing now with the new generation of women. All experiments are artificial, okay? Never in your life are you going to be sitting in front of a box pressing buttons to shock somebody. So we always want to say, what are the real world parallels? What is the external validity of the study? What is it that the study tells us about the real world? And sadly, it tells us a very important story. In 1978, 912 American citizens from San Francisco and Los Angeles committed suicide or were murdered or murdered their children or their parents in blind obedience to the instruction of their minister. The minister is Jim Jones. He was the pastor of a group, again, Church of Christ Disciple, which is called People's Temple in LA and San Francisco. If you go on the web and put Jonestown last hour, you not only get the text of his speech, he tape recorded everything. So we have a tape recording of his persuasive speech, getting these people to kill their children, and there were 250 children, kill their parents, and then take the medicine. The important thing is the semantics. He says, mothers, be kind to your children, give them the medication, then be kind to the elders, help them across to the other side where there will be peace and harmony and so forth and so on. And they were taking cyanide. And you hear the kids screaming in the background, crying because it produces convulsions. And if you didn't do it, they poured the liquid in or they gave you an injection. And so you can hear the speech online or you can read the text. And it really is a phenomenon of our times. If you know William Golding's Lord of the Flies, it's really about British choir boys who their plane crashes on an island, and at the beginning democracy takes over. The good boys, big boys protect the little boys, there's a rule of law, and then they run out of food. And so scarce resources make cooperative people become competitive. And now a group of boys led by Jack Marridew hunt down a pig, and they're about to kill the pig with spears they made, and they can't do it. Why? Because thou shalt not kill is a commandment that's been inbred in them. And then William Goulding does an interesting thing. Goulding, he has the boys take off their clothes, and one of the boys paints himself, the leader, and gets the other boys to paint their faces, a little bit like the guy in Abu Ghraib. And now, becoming anonymous somehow lowers the restraint, the inhibition against killing. And not only they kill the pig, they enjoy killing other pigs. They kill the intellectual boy whose name happens to be Piggy, and at that point fascism takes out. Might makes right. And that's what the story is about. I had my students read this when I was at NYU, and they say, teach, is that real? Is simply changing part of your external appearance enough to change your inner morality? I said, I don't know, let's do an experiment. So students come in from introductory psych class, they're greeted by my assistant, Scott Frazier. We give them a cover story. A cover story is the big lie. We say, you're going to meet two women who are trying to be creative under stress. Their job, be creative, your job is to stress them, okay, randomly. But we don't want them to see your body language, so we're going to put you in hoods and a big floppy lab coat. And here are the 4 subjects, looking a little like Ku Klux Klanners. And on the tape recording, they listen to the 2 girls, who one presented as a nice woman, one kind of bitchy. We want to see, did that make a difference? And then we bring them inside, we give them a sample of the shock that they're going to administer. It's a powerful shock. And then we're going to compare them to women randomly assigned to the same experiment, only we're going to make them individuated. They have name tags. My name is Marcy Johnson. My name is Hilda Jackson. But everything else is the same. Half of them are anonymous, de-individuated. We take away the individuation. Half are individuated. And now they see me behind the screen with the first of the 2 victims. There's going to be 20 trials in which they're going to press the button when an amber light goes on. And the measure is how long do they hold their finger down, pressing the button. And when they do, she is twisting and turning and moaning. She's not getting shocked. The actresses, and there's a little button here that they know when somebody's pressing the thing. Unlike the Milgram study, nobody's saying you must do it, you must go on. Once you create the situation, I'm inside, and they're free to do whatever they want. So the data are, this is the amount of shock, and this is the first 10 trials and the second 10 trials. And I combine, simply, our presentation, the 2 different kinds of women. So the individuated students start low and stay low. The women, and everything else is the same, only they're anonymous, as in The Lord of the Flies. They start twice as high, and over time they shock more and more and more. It becomes self-reinforcing. It's not that they're evil, it's about power. You press a button and you're controlling someone. She's like your puppet. You press the button, she's twisting and turning and moaning, and the more you do it, the more you want to do it, the more you continue to do it. Here's, long before we did our experiment, I mentioned Ku Klux Klan. Here's a little girl being socialized into that mentality. So an anthropologist at Harvard reads about my research that I published about this and says, you know, if you're right, it should make a difference how warriors go to battle, whether they're anonymous or not, in how they treat their victims. And what he does is, he goes to the human area files, which is files of all cultures in the world created by anthropologists, missionaries, psychologists, and he asks for 2 data. Do they change their appearance? In some cultures they don't. In other cultures they do, as in Lord of the Flies. In some they wear these kinds of masks. In most civilized societies, we simply put them in uniform to make them anonymous. And as you look at this picture, you can't tell one from another. And so his measure is, who is most likely to kill, torture, mutilate the enemy? People who change their appearance or people who don't. So what he does is he finds 23 cultures that have 2 bits of data. Do they change their appearance? 15 yes, no change 8. And it's not pressing a button on a box. The measure is, do they kill, mutilate, and torture the victim? 13 cultures are high, 10 are low. If they don't change their appearance, only 1 of 13 kill, torture, mutilate. And you're already doing the statistics. If they change their appearance, 12 of 13, 90%, kill, torture, and mutilate. What it says is culture has wisdom. All war is about old men sending young men to kill other young men. Only thing that varies is the reason, okay? Whether it's for oil, whether it's resources, whether it's for land, whether it's for religious beliefs. And you know it's going to be easier if you get them to change their appearance. They're a different person in the uniform, in the mask, in the disguise. But when the war is over, you know what? It's against the law to wear a uniform. You have to give it back because we want you to go back to being a peaceful young person. And the explosion of PTSD in our veterans says it doesn't happen that way. When you give up the uniform, you still have a mind that knows you tortured, you killed, you raped, and that will last forever. How else can good people be converted to do these bad things? Simply dehumanizing your victim. You don't have to change yourself, just change how you think about the other. Think about them as animals, think about them as less than human. So dehumanization is really a central process in prejudice and discrimination. It enables ordinary people to become perpetrators of evil simply in their mind by converting others as less than human and then hating them. And if you fear them as well, then you go on hating, you want to kill them. So Bandura did this little study which nobody cites. It's the only study on dehumanization. It's a very simple one. He has groups of students, let's say from Stanford, and students from UNC Asheville are going to come. And he says, we're interested in group problem solving. Students from another college are here, and they're going to try to solve problems you give them. When they get it right, you reward them, you say various things. When they get it wrong, you press a button on a box from 1 to 10, and they're all going to get shocked. So it's like the Milgram study, only it's down in groups. And what happens is, after the experiment, it takes your name, the assistant, a young kid, he goes inside, and you hear over the intercom, he's telling the experiment, sir, we're ready to begin. The subjects are here from this college. And he says, they seem to me like animals. They seem to me like nice guys, or we're ready to begin. So somebody you don't know is labeling college students from another college as nice guys, as nothing, or as animals. What difference does that make? So here's the amount of shock you give over the first of 10 trials, and you start very low. And over time, you level off when you don't know anything about them. Simply saying they're animals. A guy you don't know, who's a student, is labeling somebody else animals. You start at the same place. So if the study had only one trial, you say it doesn't make a difference. But now, just as in our study with the women at NYU, as you shock, and you get this linear increase. The good news is, humanizing others is better than saying nothing. So the ones who are humanized, you start almost in the same place, and you level off down here. But here's at the end of 10 trials, you got this huge difference. Those who have been dehumanized, you're shocking an enormous amount, more than if you don't know anything about them, and least of all if you know something positive. So sticks and stones may break your bones, but names can kill you. That's the important thing. He said they are like dogs, and if you allow them to believe at any point they are more than a dog, you've lost control of them. That's what General Miller told General Karpinski, the general from Guantanamo Bay, when he brought those Rumsfeld torture tactics to Abu Ghraib. He said they're like dogs. Well, in 1994, the Hutu government went on the radio and said, we have an announcement. Your neighbors, the Tutsis, who you've lived with for years, decades, they're really nothing more than cockroaches. And imagine your house is filled with cockroaches. What do? You kill them. And we're going to help you. And they gave every man a machete and every woman a club, and they said, it is your obligation to your government to kill all the cockroaches you can. And in 100 days, 3 months and 10 days, they massacred 800,000 plus, 800,000 plus, and the weapon of mass destruction is the machete and the club. After you start killing, then all chaos breaks loose. And they start having a decapitation contest. How many heads can you cut off? You line Tutsis up. How many women can you rape? How many women can you behead while the children watch? And so this is what my friend Sam Keane calls reflections on the hostile imagination. That he has a wonderful book called Faces of the Enemy, which has propaganda from around the world. Every country uses it to get the citizens to hate the other and to get the soldiers to want to kill the other. So this is a Tutsi child's drawing, having been forced to watch her mother's beheading. Will she ever get over that image for the rest of her life? You know, is it better to have died than to have that memory that goes with you? Somebody sent me this billboard, a huge billboard from the East Congo. The soldiers from Rwanda who escaped are now in the East Congo, spreading these terrible things, and they use rape as a tactic of mass terror. And this picture, here's a guy running, taking his pants down, trying to chase this little girl, and it says, no sexual violence, please. Like, drive on the right side of the road. So they have to have billboards to try to get people, not to practice sexual violence or rape. So Alexander Solzhenitsyn was a great Russian poet. He was also imprisoned in Stalin's Gulag Archipelago, one of the worst prison systems. And he says, the line between good and evil cuts through the center of every human being. Every human being's heart. It's not an abstraction, it's something that's inside of all of us. And so this quickly brings us to the Stanford Prison Study, which I'll go through very quickly since many of you know it. We didn't have money for a big ad, so we had a little ad. We did have college students for a prison study. It was going to go up to 2 weeks. We're going to pay $15 a day. 75 people answered the ad. We had them come down, we interviewed all of them, we gave them a battery of psychological tests. We picked 24, most normal, most healthy, and then we flipped a coin. You be a guard, you be a prisoner, you be a guard, you be a prisoner. The kids who were going to be guards, we wanted them to feel like it was their prison. So they came down a day before, they chose really nice military uniforms, they helped set up the prison. And the kids who were going to be prisoners, we said, wait at home or in the dormitories, the study will begin soon. What they didn't know is I had made an arrangement with the Palo Alto Police Department to make very realistic arrests. I thought that was critical because you needed the authorities to take away your freedom, because then only the authorities could give it to you back. If they came down and said, I'm here for the study, I'm here for the experiment, they all knew it was an experiment, they had to do informed consent, then when it got bad, as it did, they could say, I quit the experiment. But you can't quit a prison. You can only get out of a prison if you're paroled. So this is the way the study began.
Prisoner 819 did a bad thing. Prisoner 819 did a bad thing. Prisoner 819 did a bad thing.
So that's Stanford University. It was a paradise till I got there.
Police car pulls up in front, and a cop comes to the front door, knocks, and says he's looking for me. So they, right there, they took me out the door. The car, it was a real cop car, it was a real policeman, and there were real neighbors in the street who didn't know that I was, this was an experiment. And there was cameras all around and neighbors all around. They put me in the car, then they drove me around Palo Alto. They took me to the police station, the basement of the police station. Then they put me in a cell. I was the first one to be picked up, so they put me in a cell, which is just like a room with a door with bars on it. You could tell it wasn't a real jail. They locked me in there in this degrading little outfit. They were taking this experiment too seriously.
Indeed we were. So here are the prisoners that we're going to de-individuate, take away their name, they're just going to be numbers. Here are the guards in their uniforms with symbols of power, billy clubs, handcuffs, and silver reflecting eyeglasses, idea I got from the movie Cool Hand Luke with Paul Newman, to create a sense of anonymity. And it began like you saw, it always begins at 15 volts, it begins with push-ups, jumping jacks, little things, and then guards get bored. Guards worked 8-hour shifts, and especially the night shift. You got on, and the prisoners, shortly after they went to the toilet, they went to sleep, and it was boring. So the guards had to do things to entertain themselves, and the only entertainment was the prisoners. Same thing in Abu Ghraib. And so it always escalates to more and more humiliating, more and more degrading things. It always ends up sexual. Cleaning toilet bowls out their hands, stripping them naked, sexually taunting them. The kid you heard, the first to be arrested, was the first to break down in 36 hours. He was the ringleader of the rebellion, but the guards just hassled him intensely, and 8612 broke down. I'll tell, at the end, I got to remember the wonderful story about the consequences of his breakdown.
In 1971, Phil Zimbardo conducted a revolutionary experiment here in the bowels of Stanford University in the United States. It rocked the world of psychology. A group of students were divided randomly into prisoners and guards and lived in a makeshift jail. The prisoners immediately became submissive, and the guards became cruel. Within a week, Phil Zimbardo's prison was inhumane, and the experiment had to be cut short. At one stage, prisoner 416 went on hunger strike in protest. So the guards put him in solitary confinement. Amazingly, his fellow prisoners turned on him too. They were given a chance to release him.
Now what would it be? What would it be over here? 416, you're going to be in there for a while. So just get used to it.
he is totally rejected, not only by the guards, but by his other group of prisoners. And it had a very powerful, profound effect on him.
So after the prisoner broke down, A612, he became a model of how you get out. So each day thereafter, another prisoner had an emotional breakdown, meaning severe stress, that we had to release to student health and then release. So I ended the study after 6 days because it was out of control. Guards began to do, obviously, sexual stuff didn't break out till Wednesday. The first obscenities, we were surprised. Once they started using obscenities, then it was the next step to say, okay, you're Frankenstein, you're Mrs. Frankenstein, hug them, touch her, say you love her. And then after that, it got worse and worse. At the end, guards lined up the prisoners and said, you're female camels, you're male camels, get behind them and hump them. They thought it was funny because hump is a play on words. It's a camel's hump and it means intercourse. They were forcing them to simulate sodomy after 5 days. College students from all over the United States, knowing that the others are college students from all over the United States. So what are the real world parallels? Here's our guards bringing prisoners to parole board. We had parole board headed by an ex-convict. There were secretaries or graduate students. It was a different part of the psychology department. Legs chained together. Prisoners went in. They said, I want to be released. The guard said why they shouldn't. There was a whole big discussion. And then the parole board said, well, we'll think about it, take them back. Every prisoner stood up, put their hands out, put the handcuffs on, put the bag over, and left. At that point, they could have just walked out. All they had to say is, I quit the experiment, we would have released them. So the Stanford prison study is about prisons of the mind. They created the prison in their mind. It was not the physical thing in the basement. Here's the same bags. Guards have bigger guns. We didn't have any guns. Here's guards in Guantanamo Bay. Instead of the saving paper, they use sandbags. The forced fellatio in Abu Ghraib is matched by the British soldiers at Basra, and our soldiers, our guards simulated sodomy. So it's not an isolated incident there. I just want to mention 2 things before moving on. There were 12 investigations by generals about what happened in Abu Ghraib. One of them was by James Schlesinger, the former Secretary of Defense, and he had generals on his staff. He concludes with 2 incredible statements. The potential for abusive treatment on detainees during the global war on terrorism was entirely predictable based on a fundamental understanding of the principles of social psychology. Hello. Coupled with an awareness of numerous known environmental risk factors, read circumstances. Findings from the field of social psychology suggest that the conditions of war, the dynamics of detainee operation, carry inherent risks for human mistreatment. He's saying the very nature of war and the nature of how you deal with prisoners build in the possibility of mistreatment, and therefore must be approached with great caution, careful planning and training, and there was none. And he goes on to say, psychologists have attempted to understand how and why individuals and groups who usually act humanely can sometimes act otherwise in certain circumstances. That's the Lucifer effect, and that's the New Yorker cartoon, almost word for word. Then he goes on to say, the landmark Stanford study provides a cautionary tale for all military detention operations. It should have been so. The worst abuses at Stanford happened in night shift. The worst abuses at Abu Ghraib happened in night shift. They're identical parallels with the situations, only there it was significantly worse. So here's the guy I defended. He was the guy, along with Sabrina Harmon, who thought of this. They're going to put a guy in a box, tell him, put a hood on, tell him we're attaching electrodes to your hand, and when your legs give out and you fall out, you're going to be electrocuted. Imagine the anxiety you have. Your body is going to give away, at some point, and you're going to be your own electrocutioner. They didn't think it was so bad because they're not real electrodes, but he doesn't know that. And so the guy is going to stand there for hours. So this has become the symbol of torture throughout the world. It's been, artists have painted and so forth. So he's really a bad guy. Same guy a month earlier. Okay? He's now, he's an Army reservist. He's got 12 medals and awards, outstanding soldier, outstanding civilian, outstanding father, outstanding husband. And this is the same guy after. How could this guy be this guy be this guy? Okay? And again, the argument is he was corrupted by that situation. And that the verdict was dishonorable discharge, 8 years in prison. They took away all of his medals and awards. They took away all of his retirement pay, so he's impoverished when he gets out. And it ends up his wife divorced him because she was so humiliated and embarrassed. Charles Grainer got 10 years. Lindy England got 3 years. She's the woman with the holding the leash. She says they posed that picture, that the officers made her pose that picture because then they would show that to other prisoners they were going to interrogate to say, this is going to be you at the end of the leash if you don't do it. So she says, I didn't go to Abu Ghraib with a dog leash. You know, they told me to do it. Not a single officer went on trial. Not one got a reprimand, not a letter saying, you know, what you did, what you allowed your soldiers to do was unacceptable. General Karpinski was demoted to colonel. She was the fall girl, but she too was Army Reserve, so they could dismiss her without messing up. One of the most profound reports was by General Antonio Taguba, the highest-ranking Filipino general, brigadier general. And in my book, I go through all of these reports in chapter 15. And he's the one who says the following officers are guilty of command complicity. Colonel Stephen Jordan for the following things. Lieutenant this one, Captain so-and-so. Guess what happens? He gets fired. They tell him, do not bother submit a letter of request for promotion. You will never get it. So he has to resign. It's a disgrace to the Filipino community throughout the world. And so this is how the system protects itself. You blame the grunts, anybody who challenged you, even within your system, you simply get rid of. The parallel is My Lai massacre in Vietnam. Soldiers from Charlie Company are hunting down Viet Cong. They're not finding any. The soldiers are being picked off by snipers. And they come into this village called Pinkville. It's My Lai. And they expect Viet Cong there. And there's no Viet Cong. There's only women, children, old people. And it's not clear how it started. Somebody said an animal ran out. They started shooting and shooting and shooting until they killed more than 500 civilians. They didn't do it in a burst. They burned the houses down. They raped the women, and they scalped many of them, scalped. And they say, there's an interview with My Lai veteran, they say, you know, like the Indians did. And so this is horrendous. Only one person went on trial, Lieutenant Colonel Calley. Lieutenant Calley. And he was on trial specifically for the deaths of 125 people attributed to him. He got 2.5 years in house arrest. That means not in a prison, in his house. And then later, and it was commuted by Nixon, so it's not even on his record. In fact, he's a businessman somewhere in the South going around giving motivational talks. So that's the parallel with the guy I defended. So a colleague of mine, Larry James, who's an African-American colonel, was sent to Abu Ghraib to fix it. He wanted me to go with him, and my wife said it was still too dangerous. And essentially fixing it meant what? Changing the situation, having surveillance, having oversight, having obligations, saying this is what you can do, this is what you can't do. And when you do that, you eliminate all of these horrible things. We have another wonderful website, Prison EXP, short for experiment.org, which has everything about the prison study, slides, video clips, everything I've written, everything about corrections, and we hope you'll visit. In fact, we have it in 7 different languages now: Farsi, Portuguese, Italian, Polish, German, and Spanish. And it's been up for 10 years, and we've had almost a million site visitors so far. So we've produced the same effects with social input as Dr. Jekyll had to do with that mystical chemical. So my vision as a kid has been realized. We can easily seduce good people to do bad things without biology, just with basic social psychology. So what are the basic steps that grease the slippery slope of evil? Mindlessly taking that first small step. Dehumanization of others, de-individuation of self, diffusion of personal responsibility, blind obedience to authority, doing nothing as the evil of inaction. I'll talk about that in a minute when we talk about heroes. And disengaging your moral standards temporarily when you're in a particular situation. I want to present 2 examples of systemic evil. You may have heard about them, or you may not have, because the American media has suppressed information about it. In 2009, in May, a report was released from Dublin by Associated Press that was fiercely delayed into Ireland's Roman Catholic institutions, where they put poor children, boys and girls. The report says for decades, these kids have been physically abused, sexually abused, raped repeatedly, and many people knew about it and did nothing. Another report that just came out said for 30 years there have been 320 allegations of pedophilia against 183 priests in the United States. 0 prosecutions. The church pays off the victims. The church pays off the media not to publicize this. And so here's our authorities, people we care about, people we trust, to take care of our children, and instead they are the worst abusers. There's a book called Unmasking Administrative Evil, which again I recommend to you, that says, here's how systems promote evil on a big scale. We focus on the culprits, on individual criminals, the rapists and so forth, but it's systems that create the big dangers to the world. Okay, I'm going to skip this. Dostoevsky says, nothing is easier than to denounce the evildoer, nothing more difficult than understanding him. Understanding is not excusiology. By understanding, we try to understand the mechanisms by which something works so we can change it, never to excuse it. In Chip Frederick's case, I said, he's guilty. They're all guilty. They all have to be punished. But given the power of the situation that corrupted him and all of them, everybody in the night shift did bad things, his sentence should have been mitigated. He should not have gotten 8 years. He should have gotten a couple of years at the most. But the military court had to put these people up for public display, to say, look, we're going to treat these guys in a tough way. So what we need is shift away from the medical model that we've all been following, especially in psychology. Medical model is you wait for somebody to get sick and you treat him or her. You wait till they get mentally ill, you wait this. But when suddenly a lot of people have the same symptoms of flu, we stop treating each one. We say, hey, hello, there's epidemic. We have to prevent the spread. We have to understand what is the vector of disease. Bullying is a disease. Corruption is a disease. Prejudice is a disease. Spouse abuse is a disease in our culture, in many cultures. We have to see that in public health models. How do we change the system that is allowing that to go on, rather than how do we change the person? So we have to oppose the power of evil systems, because it's systems that spread prejudice, injustice, intolerance, corruption, and terrorism. And so now I very quickly want to go into part 2 in a positive way. I think we should all take a breath. Maybe we should all stand up, exhale, and now we're going to switch from evil to goodness. And hopefully I can inspire you rather than depress you more. So when we want to know what makes some ordinary people turn evil, we know the story. You know, here's the recipe: dehumanization, abuse of responsibility, authority, unjust systems, group pressure, power and control, moral disengagement, anonymity. We have that recipe down pat, not only with my research, but a lot of research that support it. But we ask the question, why do some people become heroic? We don't have a clue. There's almost no research on heroism. How could that be? In fact, one of the goals that I'm going around is encouraging students to begin to do research on heroism in various ways. Well, compassion must be involved. Compassion and empathy are virtues. The positive psychology movement started by Marty Seligman does not include heroism as a virtue, because it's an action. It's not a virtue. It's not in people. It's what people do. Is there a hero gene? I doubt it. Oxytocin is the chemical called mother love chemical. When mothers give birth, there's this chemical which promotes bonding with your child. And there's research that shows that if you give people, give them oxytocin infusion, it increases their empathy and altruism. But I mentioned before that it's the very same situation that inflames the hostile imagination of some people, like war, like corruption, like bullying, instills the heroic imagination in other people. We don't know why, but it's the same situation that provides opportunity to be a hero, that provides opportunity for others to do bad things. There are few people who do evil and fewer who are heroic. The problem is between these extremes on the bell curve of humanity, where they are outliers, is the vast majority who most of the time do nothing and do it with no imagination. I'm going to call them reluctant heroes, that they are reluctant to go to the call of service of others. But doing nothing when something is needed, they implicitly support the perpetrators of evil. In Abu Ghraib on that night shift, there were often nurses, there were often technicians, there were often medical interns, there were people who came down, saw what it was doing, they smiled and looked away. That means, okay. You smile and look away, that means they're giving their permission. Edmund Burke says, all that matters for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing. So here's that bell curve of humanity. Heroes and villains are outliers. And here are the reluctant heroes in the middle. So our problem is, how do we get the general population to be heroes? Step one, we have to build safeguards against being seduced into evil. And so we're doing that in the research I'm doing in chapter 10 and on the Lucifer effect. We say, here's how to protect yourself against these powerful forces that will seduce you on their side. And then the second thing is, here's what we're going to do to help you become heroic. Heroes transform the me into the we. A critical part of being a hero is not just the action, it's a focus on the other. So everything we're doing now says we're going to promote a social awareness, a situational savvy of making other people critically important to you. So which leader would you follow? Here's Gandhi, here's Hitler, two extremes of good and evil. Look at all their followers. Could it depend on the circumstances? You'd rather not believe that, but if you would take one of these people and put him here, one of these people here, would they be doing the same thing? There are many ways for ordinary people to become heroes. And so what I'm trying to do is change the conception of heroism. I want to give you just a few examples as models. We all know this picture of the tank man. This was a student in Tiananmen Square where students were protesting against the Chinese government. All they wanted was freedom. Those tanks like this had crushed students in a different part of Tiananmen Square. And this kid runs out in front of the tanks and he says, please, do not kill us. We're students like you. We love China. All we want to do is we want our freedom. And the other hero was the tank commander who turned around and went away. Unfortunately, this guy has disappeared. We have no idea what happened to him. But that's physical courage hero. In New York City, after 9/11, firefighters did the same thing, sacrificed themselves day after day after day for months. I think something like 327 died. And when I was president of APA, I honored the New York firefighters working with many at Brooklyn Heights Fire Department. They were the first ones on the scene, on the pile. 7 of their firemen died. I think the engine was one of the ones that got crushed. So Richie Murray was one of these guys. And he said, we're big heroes now. Next year, nobody will know our names. Okay. So that these heroes come and go. The guy who stopped Abu Ghraib was this guy, the most ordinary person in the universe. Private Joe Darby. He was a private in the Army Reserve, not even a specialist, not even a ranking. His buddy Grainer showed him the CD with those horrible pictures you saw, plus hundreds of others. And he said, this is horrendous. We're supposed to be bringing dignity and freedom to these people. We're bringing humiliation. He takes the CD and he puts it in the box of a senior investigating officer that says, sir, you should examine this. Then he goes back to his battalion and says, you know what? The guy's going to throw it away. He goes back the next day, takes it out, and brings it and hands it to him. Says, sir, I was the one who put this in your box. You have to really investigate. And so he knowing his buddies are going to get in trouble, right? And so he not only was not a hero, people in his hometown wanted to kill him. Because the newspaper said, Darby the snitch. He humiliated the Bush administration and the military. And then they had to put his wife and his mother in hiding for 3 years. Because people wanted to kill them. Only recently he was released from protective custody, and he was honored at the Kennedy Center by Carolyn Kennedy, got a Hero Award. Lin Howe is a wonderful model for all of us. He's a 9-year-old kid. He was in an earthquake in Sichuan province in 2008. The ceiling of his classroom fell down and crushed almost all the kids. He runs out, and as he's running away, he sees 2 kids struggling to get out. He runs back and helps them, and the 3 of them survive. And people said, why did you do that? He said, why? I was the hall monitor. It was my job to look after my classmates. That's the heroic imagination in action. That's a heroic imagination in action. On my way here, on the plane with me, was Captain Sullenberger. He was the captain of the plane that landed in the Hudson River. And you remember, he was the one who organized everybody to get off calmly, efficiently, quickly, made his staff, lead the way. He said it wasn't heroic. He was just doing his job. And when I saw him, I told him of this story. I said, there are parallels between what you did and what this kid did, is that your training was that if an event occurs, and it's rare that it's going to happen, you are psychologically prepared to do your job, to do your duty. We all know Rosa Parks' name, civil rights hero in the South who challenged bus segregation. I just discovered recently, at 9 months before Rosa Parks, this little girl, 15-year-old student, Claudette Colvin, refused to yield her seat to a white woman. They jailed her. She's yelling, it's my constitutional right. Was she a hero? Not at all. She was shunned by her classmates, and black civil rights leaders in the South refused to acknowledge her because they thought she was too emotional. And so they waited for Rosa Parks. There's a new book about her, Twice Toward Justice, reveals her heroism. Here's one of my favorite heroes of all time, Irina Sendler. She living in Warsaw, and the Nazis had set up a ghetto, literally a wall around this part of the town, where they were keeping Jews until they can transport them to Auschwitz to be killed. And there were, I don't know how many, 10,000, 20,000 people there. They don't have enough food, typhoid fever breaks out. She arranges with a friend who's a nurse to get her pass, goes in and persuades Jewish parents to give her their children, one at a time, to smuggle them out, which is really a difficult thing to do because people don't want to give up the kids, especially to a Catholic person. And she promises to reunite them if they're all living after the war. Her success was she organized 20 people, because she had to move the kids from place to place, from family to family, and put each kid's name and background and information in a jar buried in her yard. Somebody spied on her, she was captured, she was tortured, they broke her ankles, and she never testified. And after the war, so this is her at that, after the war, so the issue was she a hero? No, because the communists came in after the Nazis left, and they were equally anti-Semitic. So everybody was quiet about this, and it was only recently that Israel identified her as one of the righteous among the Jews. And there are at least 2,200 people throughout the world that have been identified as people who risked their lives to save Jews. And it took 40 years later. And there's a wonderful movie, a Hallmark movie called Irina Sendler, A Courageous Heart. It's just a brilliant movie. You should try to get it. So here's the Polish-American heroine who stopped the Stanford prison study. I had just started dating her. She had been my graduate student. She just had gotten a job at Berkeley. It was in the summer between finishing up as graduate student, getting a PhD, and getting a first job. And I had arranged for assistant professors and young graduate students to come down and interview everybody, guards, prisoners, and staff, in order to get a sense of how well things were going before we started the second week. So she comes down on a Thursday night, at 10 o'clock, and she sees the toilet run. Guards put bags over the prisoner's head, chained them together, cursing, pushing, yelling, and screaming. I look up, and by now I'm the prison superintendent. I'm not the researcher anymore, and I have a chart. 8 o'clock breakfast, 12 o'clock lunch, parole board hearing, and this is 10 o'clock. I put a check mark, toilet run. For me, it's a check mark. She looks at it and says, oh my God, it's terrible what you're doing to those boys. They're not prisoners, not guards, they're boys, and you are responsible. And runs out, we have this big argument, and she says, you have changed. I don't want to continue a relationship if this is the real you. I thought you were loving and caring. I don't know who this person is. And that was a double whammy, a double slap. And I said, my God, you're right. I have changed. So I was proud of the fact that I prevented the guards from using physical punishment. I never prevented them from using psychological punishment, which in the long run was clearly much worse. So I ended the study, and then, of course, what I was going to do with her. And so I married her. Actually, we got married exactly the next year in the Stanford Prison Chapel. We lived happily ever after. We have 2 wonderful kids. So the evil of inaction is that few people do evil, fewer act heroically. It's that most people do nothing. So that's our job. How do we get most people not to do nothing? Why do we do nothing? Because every mother in the world says, mind your business, don't get involved. You have to say, Mama, humanity is my business. If I don't get involved in their life, who's going to get involved if I need help? Dante says the hottest places in hell are reserved for those who in times of great moral crisis maintain their neutrality, like Switzerland, okay? We must learn that passively to accept an unjust system is to cooperate with that system and thereby to become a participant in its evil. Martin Luther King tells us that. Canadian peacekeeping force in Bosnia had to stand by and watch gypsy girls be raped because they were peacekeeping. They were not allowed to intervene. I met one of these guys who still has his nightmares about it. In Rwanda, Canadian peacekeeping forces there, headed by General Romeo Dallaire, witnessed a massacre genocide. And all they could do is try to beg people around the world to take notice, to be involved, and couldn't. He developed massive PTSD. They found him in a snowbank in Winnipeg sometime. He became a drug addict, alcoholic, And fortunately, he's recovered. He's now, I think, in part of the Canadian Senate and is giving lectures and tours about this kind of thing. Many of you heard about Wesley Autry. He's, again, the most ordinary guy in the world. He's standing on a platform at City College in New York, 137th Street, and there are 76 people, and a white guy falls across the tracks. Subway's coming in. He looks down. He's got a reason not to be violent. He's got 2 little girls. Instead, he turns to a stranger and says, "Take care of my kids." Everybody else freezes. They look and say, "Oh my God, you know, I can't even look. The train is going to cut this guy in half. He's lying across the track." He jumps down on the tracks, gets the guy between the tracks to try to save him. Fortunately, he was successful, as you'll see in a minute. He said afterwards, "I did what anyone could do. No big deal to jump on the tracks." And then he says the moral imperative: "I did what everyone ought to do."
On the New York City subway, it's hard enough finding someone who will give up his seat to a stranger, let alone be willing to give up his life for one.
The train was coming in like that.
It happened just 50-year-old Wesley Autry, a construction worker and Navy veteran, was standing on a subway platform with his 2 little girls when right in front of them, a man started having a seizure.
He kind of stumbled and over his own feet and fall backwards. I see a train coming, but the train is so close, I'm like, what do I do?
Wesley jumped onto the tracks and thought if he could just lie on top of the man, keep him from flailing, maybe the train would roll right over both of them. The clearance was exactly 21 inches. Wesley and the man, 20 and a half.
No way the train can stop before this gentleman could get him up off the tracks. So he covered him with his body and pushed him down to a point where the train wouldn't hit his head and held him down under the tracks while the train came and rolled right over the top of him.
It gave Wesley's children the scare of their young lives.
I thought he was going to get killed.
And Wesley, the scare of his, too.
I'm like talking to him, "Sir, you can't move. I got 2 kids up here looking for the father to come back. I don't know you, you don't know me, but listen, don't panic. You know, I'm here to save you."
As for the guy Wesley saved, he's 20-year-old Cameron Hollipter. And other than a few scrapes and bruises, his father says he's doing fine.
Mr. Autry's instinctive and unselfish act saved our son's life.
You know, the word hero gets thrown around a lot nowadays.
What a better way to say to start off the new year than to save a life.
Nice to be reminded of what one really looks like.
So my question is, if he was there with the other 75 and you had all the personality tests, all the information about them, would you have chosen him? He was head of the I doubt it. Okay, so now it's time to promote moral courage, civic virtue, and heroism. I have given up evil forever. I'm going to talk about it. I'm never going to do it again. I'm only going to promote goodness and heroism and not yet over the hill new life. And so the idea is every one of us can be a real hero. We want to adopt the heroic imagination, as you saw in that little Chinese kid, Lin Hao, and is in Captain Sullenberger. And the question is it time for you to adopt what I call the heroic imagination? So the heroic imagination is amplifying the voice of the world's quiet heroes. We're developing new research. There's almost no research on heroism. We're doing a bunch ourselves. I'll present one study. We want to encourage students, graduate students everywhere. We're going to try to develop a heroic imagination scholar program to fund research of students. And the idea, and we're developing courses. We have courses in Flint, Michigan, in 5 schools at the 5th grade. And we're going to do these in San Francisco. We're going to move from the 5th grade, hopefully up and down the curriculum, going to use the net to promote the heroic imagination. It's really empowering ordinary people of all ages and all nations to engage in extraordinary acts of heroism. Heroism is the antidote to public indifference and systemic evil. Heroism transforms compassion into heroic action. I'm going to debate with the Dalai Lama in October at Stanford, essentially saying it's wonderful to go around promoting compassion. Unless it's assertive compassion, action-oriented compassion, it doesn't do me any good. Compassion makes you feel good. It's like empathy. It's like all the people in Milgram's study who say, I'm not that kind of person. I don't really care. Stop pressing the button. In this case, take the heroic action. So we have quiet heroes, stories of Christians who helped Jews. Most research on heroism began and stopped there. It was interviews with Christians who helped Jews. And in every case, they say it was no big deal. You know why? Because you survived. All the people who helped Jews who were caught and killed, it was a big deal for their family. So the new conception of heroism is organized around 4 Ds. Democratize. Anyone can be a hero. What we get from Joseph Campbell is these extraordinary heroes. It's Achilles, it's Odysseus, Agamemnon. Those are the wrong heroes. Heroes are ordinary people. We want to demystify it. Most heroes are ordinary, everyday people. It's ordinary people. It's the act that's extraordinary. We want to diffuse the notion away from the solo hero. Those are military heroes. Those are physical courage heroes. Most heroes are effective in networks. That's what Gandhi tells us. That's what Martin Luther King tells us. That's the message of Mandela, and somehow we miss it because we're focused on, our kids are focused on fantastic heroes, Superman, Spider-Man, Wonder Woman, who have these special attributes they're never going to have. And we're going to have declare, in our website, we just put the first one out. The second one is going to have a place where everybody in the world can declare, I'm a hero in waiting, publicly, your name, where you come from, your age. And then while you're waiting around, you're going to become a hero in training. You're going to sign up with a couple of buddies. We're going to have a series of projects, how to be a health hero, get people to stop smoking, exercise, eat more reliably, take your medicine, etc., in your family, among your friends, be eco-hero, take the environment back from the adults who are destroying it, tech heroes, high school kids who are going to go to elderly care facilities, teach them how to use the internet, how to develop their own website, etc., etc. But essentially, it's every day, you're going to do a daily deed of social service to others. That's not heroic, but that's the preparation to be a hero. We're going to have a hero resource kit. In order to develop an ensemble, you have to have influence skills. So we're going to teach them Bob Cialdini's influence skills. In order to be a hero, you have to be a deviant. So you're going to practice for a whole day. We call it Dare to be Different. Do something weird. Put a big spot on your cheek or on your head or something. If you usually dress up, dress down, and you realize the tremendous power people put on you to be what they want you to be. If you can resist for one day, when that situation comes, you're on the subway, everybody freezes and says, don't get involved, you can push the group away and say, I have to act on my own. Heroes must act. Flying around all day just won't cut it. Sooner or later, you're going to have to fight some evil, okay? And what we're going to provide is our hero resource kit that's going to help them be effective. So the other thing hopefully we'll do, it's a massive enterprise. We're going to create a Heropedia. Heropedia takes, E.O. Wilson has, the most wonderful thing in the universe is Encyclopedia of Life. E.O. Wilson is I guess a botanist, and he got 10 science museums to put together all the information about every living creature in the universe. And you go there, every plant, every animal, every fish, and you dial from, if you're a novice, there's a little bit of information, up to you're an expert, it's everything that's known. And we're going to combine that with Jimmy Wales' Wikipedia, that you all know very well, into a Heropedia. We want to have in one place all the information of the world's heroes, the classic ones, the fictional ones, the controversial ones, but then anyone in the world can nominate their personal hero, with a picture, with a story, with a profile. We want these to be engaging stories. Wikipedia is just like information encyclopedia. We want these to be engaging, inspiring stories. You're going to be able to surf them. You can put in by gender, by age, by place, by the kind of heroism they did. They want to have a Google map of heroes. You click on Asheville, here's the names of all the people in Asheville who are in our thing. We want people to become the hero in their own story. So I just want to end with one last piece. So here's the start of research that we're doing. It's a survey of 4,000 Americans on a random probability sample. And what we find out is we ask them, have you ever done anything meeting our definition of heroism, service to others, defending a moral cause, there was a high cost or risk, you did it voluntarily without expectation of reward. 20%, 1 of 5 qualify as heroes by that definition. Opportunity is the big difference. If you live in an urban area, you're more likely to be a hero than if you live in a rural area. If you move to the suburbs, you're never going to be a hero because no shit happens in the suburbs. You have to have opportunity. Education matters. The more educated you are, the more likely you are to be a hero because you're more sensitive to things happening around you. Volunteering matters. We found out many of our heroes also had volunteered significantly in their lives, maybe up to 60 hours on the average. Gender matters. Males more than females, because most of the things they cited were physical courage things. And many of the things women do, they do not identify as heroic, although we do. Race matters. This is the most amazing finding. Blacks were 8 times more likely than whites to have engaged in some heroic deed. Now, it could be great opportunity. We're now tracking down. Now, this is controlling for urban versus rural, but is it that these are from the inner city, or are blacks more sensitive and more willing to be deviants, come to the aid of other people? People who are heroes and volunteers were 3 times more likely to have suffered from personal traumas in their life, or they survived a disaster. So having experienced personal suffering, they were more likely to want to give their time as altruistically and also to engage in heroic behavior. These results are true controlling for all demographic variables: education, socioeconomic status, and all demographic variables. Of the sample, 72% reported helping another person in a dangerous emergency, 16% reported whistleblowing, 6% reported sacrifice to a non-relative or stranger, 15% reported defying unjust authority, and not a single one of them has been identified as a hero. Again, you need opportunity, but you also need the media. This guy, Wesley Autry, happened to be in New York. Sullenberg happened to be in the Hudson River. This big hero in the plane landed in Potomac, plane crashed in Potomac, somebody jumped in to save the woman. If it happens where there's not media around, people say, really very nice, it makes the background of the newspaper and it's gone. So we want to highlight all of those people. So what we've done is we've organized a Heroic Imagination Project. It's hip. We want to explore and encourage our inner heroes, giving voice to the nation's quiet heroes. This is our logo we've just developed. And let me go back. I forgot to. So we have a new website. It just went up yesterday, www.heroicimagination.org. And we have articles and lectures I've given. We don't have the Heropedia yet because we need a lot of money. When I go back home, we're going to do fundraise. I get the hat in the hand. And we don't have how to sign up to be a hero in waiting, but we will very shortly. I want to end with 2 pieces. The social context of heroism. Focusing on the other is the most important thing. It's a step before you take the heroic action. John Donne said, "No man is an island entire of itself. Every man and woman is a piece of the continent, a part of the main. Any man's death diminishes me because I am involved in mankind and therefore never sent to know for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee." That's a famous Ernest Hemingway's book, For Whom the Bell Tolls. Heroic Imagination Project is the bell for whom heroism tolls. Each person is a part of humanity. Each person's pulse is part of humanity's heartbeat. Heroes circulate the life force of goodness in our veins. What the world needs now is more heroes. It needs you. And what Yoda says, do or do not. There is no try. So we have to get a world of people focused on others and people willing to act on behalf of others. So heroes are us. My new mission in life is seeding the earth with heroes. And so we want people to join us to become hipsters. And so I want to end not in the serious vein of evil and preaching, in a humorous vein. It turns out that I have just discovered on YouTube that I'm a hero in virtual reality. There's going to be a movie about my heroic exploits, and here's a humorous preview that actually a high school student I tracked down did. And it's called Zimbardo, the Hero Movie. And then we'll end, and we'll sign books and hug and embrace. It's really well done.
He was head of the APA until he lost everything. Now, Philip Zimbardo is back, and he wants revenge.
Watch this. It's brilliant.
From the producer of Richard Gill and The Economist of Secrets, and the director of Mr. McCormick Goes to the Circus, comes an epic story of love. Courage. Betrayal. And social psychology.
amazing. What's this? It's like 5 different movies. James Bond. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you. Wow. We melted the snow.
Thank you so much. Don't forget, there'll be book signing, book sales, t-shirt sales outside. And I want you all, if you get the chance and you see one of our volunteers, ushers in the black with the red and black Z, thank them, because without them, this would have been impossible. Thank you.
Thank you.